help you?
I'm Dylan Peterson, and I just killed 2 people.
Who did you kill?
Matthew Nagel and Mrs. Nagel, I guess.
And how did you kill them?
With a knife.
Are they there too?
Well, they're here physically, but yeah, they're not here spiritually.
Who are they to you?
Who are they to me?
Uh-huh.
No one. Oh, poor Sandy just stopped breathing. Poor Sandy.
How do you spell your first name?
How do I spell my first? Dylan.
And your date of birth?
Come on, I just killed 2 people.
Okay. How did you get into their house?
They let me in.
Okay.
Really? No. Come on. I killed 2 people.
I understand that, Dawn.
You got that?
Yes.
I killed 2 people. I killed them.
Why did you kill them?
Because I was born to. Just, the lights on. Get them here.
Dylan Peterson is letting the operator know he's killed 2 people, and he's looking for a response, which is often what a person with psychopathy wants. They've done the act, they want a reaction from somebody else, and the operator isn't responding to all of his cues that are designed to elicit maybe some shock, some horror, or something other than what she's doing, and that's why he's irritated.
Tonight, this Vancouver family gathers for dinner, but with one less brother at the table. 15-year-old Matthew Nagel was the youngest, now the victim of a brutal stabbing. Police found Nagel and his mom, Sandra Terrell, dead inside their home. Police say 25-year-old Dylan Peterson called 911 and confessed to killing them.
I'd heard about Dylan. He was just a guy hard on his luck that needed some help, and he seemed like a good guy, you know.
Peterson went to the Culinary Institute with their brother Nick, and after losing his apartment, Nick invited him to move in with his family. For 2 months, he was the perfect house guest, but on Sunday, they say he became a psychopath.
As a child, I was hyperactive, like not flamboyant, but energetic and always getting into trouble. And, you know, I consider myself at that time an average teenager. I wasn't treated like an average person. I was always treated differently. You know, a bit of a loner, kind of a weird kid, you know.
How did you and your mother get along?
Kids, we were kept separate from our parents. Unless we ever got to be together, really, it was like on a daily basis. It was at the dinner table. That was with her second husband.
What happened to your natural father? Did your mom divorce you?
Yeah, he was abusive, and he dropped us off at my grandparents' house one day when I was 5 or 6.
He just disappeared?
I haven't seen him since. My first stepdad, he was an abusive man.
Were you abused?
Not if you ask me, no.
Peterson's painting a picture of himself as having grown up in a tumultuous childhood. We know that children who experience adverse childhood events tend to have a higher likelihood of mental health disorders, including antisocial tendencies.
He's pointing something out where he doesn't feel his mother recognized what he was experiencing. He has an axe to grind. He's got feelings about what she didn't do, and they're still very much alive in his head.
Do you have a poor image of yourself?
Always. As an odd kid, got made fun of a lot.
Do you think you have any self-worth?
No. It's all fake. I always knew that there was something inside of me. I always knew that there was something inside of me, and I could picture it.
Inside of you what? Good or bad?
Something wrong, something that I missed. Drink, you know, go out to the bar, couldn't keep a job.
He discloses that when he was 21, he began to drink alcohol and spiraled into severe substance abuse. We know that individuals with psychopathy tend to seek stimulation, and that can be from driving in a vehicle really fast to using drugs and alcohol. And in fact, we know that just a few days before this arrest, he was arrested for trying to purchase cocaine.
This is a perfect example of someone that lives a parasitic lifestyle. They're living off of others without care or concern. They're not paying debts. They're not taking responsibility for anything. And yet he's still the victim in this story.
Who's the closest friend you have?
My closest friend. It was Matthew. Just tell me Matthew.
The 15-year-old.
Yeah.
But he's dead.
Yes, Dad.
How does that make you feel?
How's that make me feel? Relieved.
Why do you feel relieved?
Because I got it out. I got it out. Whatever that's been eating me away has been appeased. You know, it's been satisfied.
Is it a demon?
I believe it to be a demon, absolutely.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I don't know what to describe it as.
A monster.
How long has it been inside you?
The monster's always been there.
He's not taking the responsibility of killing somebody. He's blaming it on his past and something inside of him. Peterson is saying his family has failed him, the community has failed him, society has failed him, and this is what happens now. The monster comes out and the monster is doing this, displacing the blame. It's very possible that he's describing this demon part of him so he can leave open the fact that he might want to plead not guilty by reason of insanity, which would mean he'd have to have some element of psychosis or psychotic behaviors, some disconnect from reality.
So everyone goes home at midnight or leaves the apartment. Who's left there at the apartment?
Just three of us, just Sandy and Matthew.
Was everything okay?
Everything was fine. I wasn't all right. Because I was a bit angry at Sandy, really. Because Matthew had got his report card and there were like 4 or 5 F's on it. I love that kid, yeah. He was a good kid. He was a good kid. He just needed a little discipline.
Was he like a brother to you?
He was like my little brother.
He seems to feel entitled to be condescending toward the mother, be upset about bad grades, be upset about the way kids are raised today. He has so much self-inflated worth and value in himself and grandiosity that he believes he's in a position to be judging any of these other areas of life.
Well, you sound like you really cared about and looked after him.
I tried to.
Did you all go to bed at a certain time last night?
I went to bed. I don't know when. I pretended to sleep, I should say.
What happened to get your attention to Matthew? Did something specific happen? Did you have a bad thought that came into your head?
Well, first, I went into the bathroom, and I felt tall.
You are tall. You're 6'1".
I know, but I don't always feel tall. Yeah, and sometimes I slouch, but I found myself standing very erect. Very erect, and I was, uncharacteristically looking at them.
There was actually some planning and calculating that went into it because he had to pretend to fall asleep. I think he studies. It's sort of like, a reptile studying for prey. The thoughts on his mind, he's not saying it yet. Then when he talks about going into the bathroom, it's a nice description of what we call depersonalization, where a person has an altered perspective of their physical body. They may feel taller or shorter than they actually are. And they may feel like they don't quite recognize themselves in the mirror. And we know that those states are associated with chemical changes in the brain. It's an indicator that there's stress going on.
Yeah, and so I look in the mirror, and I saw his eyes.
You saw whose eyes?
The person inside me.
What's the facial features look like? Is it the mirror image of you?
Yeah, but he sneers. And I always tell him, I say, I know you. I know you.
Where does it go?
And then there's no more Dylan. There's no more Dylan.
This narrative that Peterson's describing to them about having a monster inside of him can be challenging for detectives because now they're trying to understand whether or not he has a true mental illness. Is he dissociating? Is he psychotic? Usually people that have psychosis, which is a thought disorder encompassed by delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thought process, and disorganized behavior, he doesn't have that. He is somewhat organized in his behavior, and he's definitely organized in his thought process. He's telling us exactly what he's doing in detail from A to Z.
And then he picked up a knife out of the knife kit. And I found just my sharpest knife.
Why kill Matthew first?
Because if I went in the room, Matthew would have came into the room, and that would have been more difficult.
So neutralize Matthew as a threat first?
So just get rid of Matthew and take care of his mother.
How did you do it?
I think the two couches, there's the little one right here, there's the long one right here. There's a little walkway. Matthew's head was right here. Yeah, he was in the fetal position on the couch, like sleeping like he does all the time.
What did you do?
I tried to find the best angle, like I just wanted it to be a blow. Well, he got up, he's like, Dylan, no! And then I just, and then I went into the room and saw Sandy, and
what was she doing?
She just heard noises, so she came out of her room, and I started stabbing her. And I heard Matthew was still breathing, so I gave him a few final blows to make sure that he was dead, and then made sure Sandy was dead too.
Why so many times?
I thought that she was the cause of the problems.
It seemed like you were taking on a lot of aggression on her by stabbing her so many times. Front and back, I think she had over 30 stab wounds. Were you mad at her?
Must have been. I had to have been. I was definitely mad at her. I was definitely mad at her.
If it's overkill, then we could say he's delivering rage and anger that belong to more than Sandy, that this comes from the past. So my assumption is that Sandy represents whatever feelings he has about Mom, and she is the target of all of that rage.
Did you get any relief after you killed Matthew and Sandy?
Yeah, that everything that had happened in my life had led up to this, and now I had done it.
Do you have remorse? Do I have remorse?
I don't know what remorse feels like. Just feeling, I have no emotion. I feel, and I care about things, but when it comes down to it, brass tacks, no. I'm a monster. How can a monster have any feelings at all?
So you were the monster in the mirror.
I'm totally the monster in the mirror. I am him and he is I. That's why I say that it's we.
Peterson has demonstrated from time to time some self-awareness. And here at the end, we see that he knows he probably should feel bad, but at the same time, he's got some impression management he's trying to uphold. And that is that he's trying to portray himself as a monster. It leaves you to believe that any remorse he might actually display is likely to be superficial.
You hated yourself so much that you eliminated one of your closest people to you.
Yeah. It should have been me. It really should have. It should have been me. I should have been somewhere with some maniac and they should have killed me.
Do you think you're a sick person?
I know I'm a sick person.
Only a demon can murder for...
.4486 North Farmer 249. A caller is saying that he's killed his family. He says that he's left the gun unloaded and the clip will be on the tailgate of a vehicle. The subject that we spoke to says he shot them and saying that he's positive they're dead. And he is not checking on them otherwise. Medical is staging in the area. They're saying he's currently in the roadway.
We have breaking news tonight. Police say 55-year-old Jesse Hewing is in custody, charged with the murders of his wife and her parents.
A male subject called 911 saying that he killed his family. When deputies arrived, they took him in custody. They went in the residence and located 3 adults deceased.
Take me serious when I tell you something, and they did not take me serious. So this is the consequence of that. The truth of the matter is I couldn't stop myself from doing it.
I'll be honest with you, I do know a little bit about what happened, but not much. So, Jesse, kind of tell me what happened.
I shot my wife and her mom and her stepdad. Cold-blooded murder this afternoon.
Okay.
Shot them each twice in the head.
Okay. Well, that's about as straightforward as it gets.
Clearly, there's a sense of pride in his voice. There's a sense of empowerment. He's not broken down about it. He's not emotional about it. The truth may be that there are likely more emotional issues going on here that he may not be even aware of. That I think the course of this interview may give us some hint as to what lies under this very almost Teflon-like exterior.
I'll go ahead and ask you, why'd you do that, Jesse?
I lost my temper.
Sure, okay.
Wife had back surgery last week, Friday.
Okay, so before we go any further, just so I have all my details crystal clear, what was your wife's name?
Tanya.
Okay, so then there was, you said 2 more people that were involved. What was the next person's name?
Linda, and I don't know how they spell their last name.
Okay. Do you know what it is, though? And if you don't know, that's fine. What's
I don't know.
No,
yet,
that's
not
fine.
to tell you.
What was his name?
Ron.
Ron. Okay.
Yes.
And just so I'm clear on that, Linda and Ron were Tanya's parents.
That's correct.
Your in-laws.
That was Tanya's biological mother and her stepfather.
One thing that you notice when he's describing the murder is how impersonal it is. He rarely uses their names. He often refers to them as him or her, even when he's talking about his wife. The victims of Jesse Huey were Tanya, which is his wife, and her parents, Linda and Ron Kaler. It's shocking that he doesn't even know his in-law's last name. The fact that he has been married for 6 years and has no idea who these people are, and yet is so irritated, seemingly, by them that he decides to kill them.
Her mom and Ron live in a RV. They decided that they were coming to Missouri to support Tanya in her recovery. I don't get along with her mom. Hadn't been like outward friction there, but I stayed away from them. Don't want them in my life. I don't want to be in their life, you know.
Right.
And so what ended up happening is her mom moved in on me. Now, bearing in mind, that's my place, and I'm the one that pays the bill on it. So I felt pretty disrespected.
Because it sounds like they would just show up and invite themselves.
Well, see, when Tanya and I got together years ago, her mom and Ron pulled this before, where they just show up, kind of unannounced and stay.
Yeah.
You know, that's no social grace there at all. You understand what I'm saying?
And so did that surgery that she had, I imagine, being a back surgery, that it probably laid her out, she probably couldn't walk, or is that not the case?
She... At the very first, she was walking. Over the course of the week, I'm watching my wife improve, where she's able to get up and walk around. And, you know, Linda wasn't making there was no indication they were going to leave at all.
It's so ironic that Jesse Huey is saying, you know, the mother had no social graces, as if he's in any position to be discussing social graces when he just murdered them. And he seems to have no sympathy for what his wife was going through in her recovery or gratitude for the fact that her parents were there to help. Instead, he's just frustrated that they're there.
So tell me how those conversations went.
Well, I told her, I said, you know, I'm not happy about this. I ain't going to live like this. I said, you know, they need to go. I am here. Her mom, like I said, wasn't able to physically help her do anything. You know, I pay the bill on that place, so that gives me some say. Granted, she's on the note too, so, you know, Linda came in and burrowed in like a tick and just pretty much made it obvious that she wasn't going anywhere. This afternoon, I was pushed to the point I could not resist letting go. Like I said, I felt intruded upon. I felt disrespected. I talked to Tanya probably Wednesday, and I left the front door open. Her mother was in the kitchen right there, and I left the front door open so she could hear every goddamn word.
I think another aspect of Huey's behavior here and his reaction is that any intrusion to him feels like he's losing control over his life and himself. And so he has no tolerance for anybody else asking anything of him, or no tolerance for having to comply or to be docile or giving to any other human being.
I apologize for not asking, but Jesse, what do you do for work?
Well, I was a construction worker, and then my hip and my knees and my low back went out, and I haven't been working.
Okay, so are you on disability, I guess?
No, I'm not on disability.
Okay.
The doctors I went to go see, I had carpenter's insurance. The doctors that I had to go see through that insurance really didn't do nothing to help me.
Okay, so did you and Tanya live upstairs or downstairs?
No, we lived downstairs. My dad lived in the modular upstairs.
What we've heard from Huey is that he's not working, he's not contributing to the home. He's not describing himself as particularly helpful. We have a picture here of a very one-sided parasitic relationship. He's living life the way he wants to, and his wife has to tolerate it and support it. And if she does not, as she didn't in the moments before she was killed, it had catastrophic consequences.
So tonight, when this incident happened, specifically, what led up to this?
Well, I had gone out and visited some friends and went and had lunch and stuff. Okay. And when I come home, they were all gone. And I looked around the house, and it kind of looked to me like Linda may have picked up her stuff, like maybe she got the hint and left. I thought, well, good.
Yeah.
Maybe she's finally got the hint, and, you know, they're going to go on about their way.
Okay.
And I was upstairs talking to Dad about the whole situation. And anyway, while I was up there, I see him roll in. I went down there, and I walked in, and they're all sitting there in the kitchen. I said, Ron and Linda, you need to leave. And my wife said, they're not going anywhere. I'm half owner of this place. They stay here as long as they want to.
Mm-hmm.
So I went outside, I got my gun, I walked back in, I shot them all in the head. And I shot them all in the head again to make sure they were down.
He wanted to make sure they were extinguished. And he refers to them in a way that's so dehumanizing. He says, I want to make sure they were down, which is how you refer to animals if you're going to euthanize them. And that's exactly how he saw these people that were his family.
Okay. Where did you get the gun from?
I had it in my truck. And that's when I decided, all right then, because, you know, I warned her earlier in the week, and I told her I was very unhappy about this, and I said, you know, you're going to make me go off. Mm-hmm. And if you do, this is on you. And this is what she got for it. She made me go off, and now there's 3 dead people. It was over and under a minute. Put them all on the ground.
You shot Ron, he was in your chair. Did he see you coming, or?
Yeah.
What did he?
First he looked at her, and he started turning his head to me, and by then I got it. And Linda was all surprised that I just shot Ron, and I shot her in the head. And then I turned and I shot her in the head.
Yeah.
You know, I warned them, told them. I guess she decided to call my bluff, so here we are.
Did any of them get anything out verbally?
Nothing more than a little bit of a squeal. Like I said, it was all over real quick. I heard Linda gurgle a little bit, so I went and put another one into her. And by that time, Tanya had stood up and squealed, and I shot her. And then I went back through and I shot them all again to make sure they were done.
Huey seems to be getting a little emotionally activated here. He's really getting into the story. You can hear his voice getting louder. He's a little more animated, and he's retelling details from the story, even saying words like he heard a gurgle, and very specific details that lends the impression that he's almost enjoying retelling the story, retelling what happened.
How long had you and Tanya been married?
I don't know, 5, 6 years.
5, 6 years.
I've been married 3 other times.
Did you and Tanya ever get into arguments about other stuff? I know all married couples get in fights once in a while, but did you guys ever get into it about anything else other than her parents?
Sure. She was pretty disappointed, you know, when my hip and my knee and my low back went out and I couldn't work anymore.
Yeah.
You know, she was pretty disappointed about that.
You know, I gotta ask Jesse, how are you feeling right now?
I'm upset, you know.
Sure.
Like I said, I didn't start off wanting to do this. I never wanted to do this. I feel like they pushed me to the point that I had to do it. So
he basically blames her for her own death. He does not take any responsibility for it and shouldn't have done that. It's her fault. And that's pretty typical of certain psychopaths who don't want to take responsibility for the atrocious things that they've done and who blame their victim. The investigator does his best to try to tease out the level of social stress, the level of imposition that these victims put on him, and finds none. But his code is no strikes, you're out. That if he feels a certain way, he'll act on it. He's not putting it into any kind of context.
Specifically, can you kind of tell me like what has really specifically been happening between you and Linda and Ron for it to lead up to this? No threats or anything like that?
I did tell Tanya earlier in the week that I was really unhappy with the way this was going and I wasn't going to put up with it. And if she persisted that, it was going to be on her, the consequences would be on her. And I guess she decided to call my bluff today.
Okay, and so when you told Tanya that the consequences would be on her, did you elaborate and tell her what those consequences would be?
I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. And here's the deal, I'm a veteran. Take me serious when I tell you something, and they did not take me serious. So this is the consequence of that. Now, I've killed them and ruined the lives of, their family. The truth of the matter is I couldn't stop myself from doing it. It happened fast. I couldn't stop myself from doing it.
Have you had episodes or any sort of...
Yeah, I've been PTSD ever since I come out of the war. I've been dangerous for a long time. There's been 100 times over the years that I've gotten really close to being in serious trouble. I just had enough, okay? I had enough of it. It wouldn't be a good idea for you guys to put me with anybody because now that I've murdered 3 people, I ain't got nothing holding me back. Don't put me with someone. It's probably not going to be a good idea if you do that.
Well, I can certainly...
I'm telling you I'm dangerous, and it would be a bad idea for you to do that.
Okay. Well, we'll make sure that message gets passed along because I don't want to see anybody else get hurt.
Like I say, I just killed 3 people, so another one ain't going to make a difference to me now.
I think he's just, at this point, being himself. I think at this point, he's finally reached a point in his existence where he has let go and feels good about letting go. He finally doesn't have to pretend anymore to be civilized. He doesn't have to pretend or make an effort to control these intense, angry feelings that cause him to become homicidal.
But I can tell, though, that, again, we know a mistake's been made, but I know that if you could take this back, you would, right?
I really wish I hadn't been put in that position.
Sure.
I've been way weak. I've got a personal code. If someone disrespects me 3 times, I'm gonna fix that problem.
About how many times do you think, if you had to put a number on it, your best guess that they've shown up and have entered your house and things like that, beyond this week?
Show up and stay one time, earlier on, like 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
And then Ron would say, sometime during the day, he would just show up and let a man walk through the door and go sit in my chair at the table. And, if I needed to walk through there, he wouldn't get out of the way.
Well, I think that's going to be it. And again, Jesse, I really do appreciate you sitting in here and being cordial with me and helping me understand what happened.
I really don't expect to be bonded or bailed out. Let's get on with it.
You get the impression that his goal really is to live a parasitic lifestyle, kind of bum off of one person as long as he can and then move on to another person. And in this instance, when that is disruptive, he can't handle his rage and frustration in an appropriate way. The thought of having to actually take care of himself, set a goal, work toward it, is too much for him. So he reacts by getting rid of the problem, even if it means that he's going to end up sitting in jail for the rest of his life. Again, he's still going to be taken care of.
Okay, so I understand you had some text messages,
Yes.
and she maybe confided in you about a couple things.
She told Jesse that, only one person can be able to do the surgery. So would he stay there the whole day so he could find out what the results of the surgery were? And he said, well.
The night begins with a sound no one can place afterward. A dull impact swallowed by cicadas and humidity, somewhere between the hiss of a passing car and the slam of a door that should never have been opened. And by morning, a quiet Florida neighborhood will learn that silence can be the loudest warning of all, because when the sun rises on August heat and palm shadows, one person is already gone, and nothing about the scene makes sense. A car sits half crooked in a driveway, keys still in the ignition, driver's door ajar as if its owner stepped out for only a second, groceries melting into the floor mat, condensation pooling under plastic bags, the radio frozen mid-song, and neighbors will later swear they heard nothing unusual. No scream, no struggle, just the ordinary hum of a community that believed danger belonged somewhere else. The missing person is young enough to have plans, old enough to have secrets, known well enough that their absence punches a hole straight through the block. And by noon the words begin to circulate in whispers and on local radio. Missing mysterious, possible foul play. Police tape flutters in the heat like a nervous pulse. Officers walk slow, careful, as if the truth might shatter under their boots. There are no obvious signs of violence, no blood blooming on concrete, no broken glass glittering like a confession. Only that open door, those groceries, that question hanging heavy in the air. Why would someone leave like this? And where did they go? The house is searched room by room, drawers opened, beds pressed, trash sifted, and nothing explains the absence. A purse sits where it should. A wallet is missing. Or maybe it isn't. Even the facts can't decide who they want to be yet. By the second day, the story has grown teeth. News vans idle at the curb. Aerial shots show tidy roofs and blue pools that suddenly look sinister from above. Friends speak into microphones with tight smiles and shaking hands, saying the same thing over and over, that this doesn't happen here, that she would never just disappear, that he always came home, that something is wrong, very wrong. Detectives nod, take notes, collect timelines that refuse to line up. And somewhere in the background, a word slips into the conversation. Quiet at first, then louder. Cold case. But it isn't cold yet. Not even close. Investigators knock on doors, question coworkers, trace phone records, rewind credit card receipts, trying to rebuild the last ordinary hours before the extraordinary happened. Someone remembers a strange car parked too long at the corner. Someone else recalls an argument. Voices sharp, faces tense. A gas station camera shows a figure who could be anyone or no one, passing through the frame at 2:17 a.m., the timestamp blinking like a dare. Every lead seems promising until it isn't. Every theory strong until it collapses under its own weight. Days turn into weeks, and the searches grow wider, more desperate. Volunteers comb scrubland and drainage canals under a punishing sun. Helicopters thrum overhead, scanning for anything out of place in a landscape that suddenly feels hostile, full of hiding places. Dogs track scents that fade into nothing. Flyers curl on telephone poles, rain-soaked and hopeful, eyes staring out from grainy photos that ask the same question over and over. Have you seen me? Then comes the first real shock. A discovery miles away, half buried, tangled in weeds or hidden where no one thought to look. Something that confirms what everyone feared, but no one wanted to say out loud. The case shifts in an instant, from missing person to something darker, heavier, irreversible. Detectives lower their voices. The community holds its breath. Vigils appear overnight, candles trembling in the warm breeze, faces lit by grief and anger and disbelief. Evidence is collected with ritual care. Fibers, soil, a scrap of material that doesn't belong, a mark that could be nothing or everything. The autopsy raises more questions than it answers. Timelines blur, causes overlap, and the truth slips further away, even as the facts pile up. There is no clear weapon, no clear motive, just a sense that whatever happened was fast, deliberate, and meant to leave as little behind as possible. Suspects emerge, as they always do. The last person to see the victim alive, a former partner with a temper and an alibi that creaks under pressure, a coworker who knew too much, or maybe nothing at all. Each is pulled into the harsh light of interrogation rooms, each story recorded, dissected, compared, and each time the pieces refuse to lock together. Alibis are thin but technically intact. Timelines almost work, but not quite. Reasonable doubt grows like a shadow, stretching longer with every passing month. As the first year ends, the case begins to cool, not because it matters less, but because momentum is a fragile thing. Detectives are reassigned. Files grow thick with paper and thin with hope. New crimes demand attention. The evidence locker closes its doors on labeled bags that hold unanswered questions. Outside, life resumes its rhythms, but something underneath has shifted. Doors are locked sooner. Strangers are watched longer. Parents hold their children a little tighter. The headlines fade, then vanish. The story becomes a reference point, a cautionary tale whispered to newcomers. The thing that happened back in 2001, remember that? For the family, time doesn't heal so much as stretch the pain into something survivable. A constant ache sharpened by every anniversary, every false tip, every phone call that starts with hope and ends with disappointment. They learn the language of waiting, the vocabulary of almosts and maybes and what-ifs. Years pass. Technology changes. Databases grow smarter. DNA gets louder. Somewhere, in a box that hasn't been opened in a long time, a tiny clue waits without knowing it is small, insignificant looking, overlooked because it didn't scream for attention when everyone was listening for something louder. It is the kind of detail that means nothing until suddenly it means everything, the kind that doesn't solve a case so much as crack it open. And yet, for now, in this moment, the case remains suspended between memory and mystery. A Florida 2001 cold case that refuses to rest, solved only in rumors and late-night speculation, unsolved in reality, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions that still hum beneath the surface of an ordinary place, reminding everyone who listens closely enough that some stories never truly end. They just wait, patient and silent, for the smallest sound to finally break them open. Time moves forward, but the case stays where it is, pinned to a year on a file folder, to a set of photographs that never change, to a name spoken less often but never forgotten, and inside the department the file becomes heavy in a different way, not with answers, but with the weight of everything that didn't work. Detectives who once chased leads with caffeine and adrenaline now flip through pages with slower hands, seeing patterns they missed before, wondering how many truths can hide in plain sight. The evidence hasn't gone anywhere. It has only been waiting. The original scene is revisited in memory first, then in person. The driveway, the car, the angle of the door. Someone notices how ordinary it all looks, how clean, how controlled, and that thought begins to itch. Crimes of rage are messy. This wasn't messy. This was efficient. The kind of efficiency that suggests planning, or at least confidence. Confidence comes from familiarity. Familiarity narrows the field, even as the years widen it. Old interviews are replayed, voices crackling through outdated recording equipment, statements filled with certainty that sounds less convincing now. People were so sure back then, so sure of timelines, so sure of what they saw and when. Memory, it turns out, is a living thing. It changes when no one is watching. A neighbor's recollection of a car shifts from dark to light, from sedan to truck. A coworker's casual remark about a late-night call suddenly feels heavier when heard with new ears. The victim's final day is reconstructed again, hour by hour, minute by minute, not as it was believed to be, but as it might have been. A stop that wasn't supposed to happen. A conversation that never made it into the reports because it seemed irrelevant. A routine that broke just once. Investigators start circling those breaks, drawing red lines through the past, mapping moments where something could slip in, unnoticed at the time. There's a phone record that keeps resurfacing. One call, short, almost nothing, placed and received within a window everyone assumed was safe. Back in 2001, it was brushed aside, logged, forgotten. Now it glows on the page. Who calls someone at that hour and says so little? Who hangs up that fast? The number leads nowhere at first. A dead end tied to an account long closed. But dead ends have a way of hiding side doors. A former suspect reappears, not because new evidence points directly at them, but because time has a way of loosening people. They talk more freely now. They remember things differently. An alibi once airtight now shows seams. A job they claim to be at no longer exists. The manager long gone. The record shredded. It isn't proof. It's pressure. And pressure makes people leak. The community, largely unaware of this quiet revival, continues on, unaware that the past is being stirred again. To them, the case is history. To the detectives, it's a living puzzle. They track down witnesses who have moved states away, who answer the phone with surprise and suspicion, who say they thought this was over. Some are relieved to talk. Others aren't. One hangs up mid-sentence. That gets written down. Forensics, once limited, now offers a second chance. Evidence that couldn't speak before is asked to try again. Fibers are re-examined. Trace material is tested with methods that didn't exist when the case was fresh. Results come back slowly, methodically, each one either a disappointment or a small jolt of electricity. Most are nothing. One is not. It's tiny, almost embarrassing in its simplicity. A fragment overlooked because it didn't look like evidence, because it didn't match anything obvious, because there were bigger, louder mysteries demanding attention. It sat in storage for years, cataloged and silent. Now, under new scrutiny, it starts to whisper. Not a name. Not yet. Just a direction. That direction points away from the obvious suspects and towards someone who barely registered the first time around. A background figure. A name mentioned once in passing. Someone who crossed paths with the victim so briefly, it felt inconsequential. Brief encounters, investigators know now, can be the most dangerous. They reopen that thread, tug gently, then harder. The past resists, then gives a little. A timeline is redrawn. A movement that didn't make sense before suddenly aligns. The car sighting, the call, the gap no one could fill. It still isn't enough. Not even close. But it's something that didn't exist yesterday. And in cold cases, something is oxygen. Meanwhile, the family is contacted again. Carefully, respectfully. The call they've learned to brace for. They listen, ask the same question they always do, and hear the same careful answer. Progress, nothing definitive, but a tone that feels different this time. Hope is dangerous, but it sneaks in anyway, quiet and unwelcome, because it feels worse not to have it all. As investigators push forward, resistance appears. Records are missing. People decline interviews. One person suddenly hires a lawyer. Another changes their story in small but telling ways. The past is no longer sleeping. It's restless. And restlessness leaves fingerprints. A break comes late. Not with a dramatic confession or a flashing siren, but with a document, unearthed from a secondary archive, misfiled years ago. It's mundane on its face, a receipt, a log, a notation someone once thought too boring to matter. It places the right person in the wrong place, at exactly the wrong time. It doesn't prove murder. It proves proximity. In this case, that's explosive. Now the pressure increases. Surveillance resumes, quiet and patient. Conversations are monitored. Movements tracked. The suspect, unaware of how close the net is drawing, begins to make mistakes. Small ones, nervous ones, accomoir. An overcorrection there. They know something is happening. They just don't know what. The case, once dormant, now hums with energy. Desks are cleared. Whiteboards fill with notes and arrows. The words cold case are still used, but they feel outdated, inaccurate. This isn't cold anymore. It's warming fast, approaching a boil. And somewhere in that rising heat, the tiny clue that started it all sharpens into focus. No longer a whisper, but a voice, pointing steadily toward a truth that has waited more than 2 decades to be heard. A truth that will soon step out of the shadows and force a reckoning no one in this community ever believed would come. The suspect doesn't know it yet, but the past has started following them again, close enough to hear their breathing, close enough to notice the way their routines tighten, how their eyes linger a second too long on passing police cars, how they start checking mirrors that never mattered before. Investigators notice too, fear has a rhythm, guilt has habits. When a person believes they got away with something for long enough, they begin to live like it's true, and that comfort becomes the crack everything else breaks through. The renewed investigation moves quietly, deliberately, nothing like the frantic energy of the early days. This time there are no press conferences, no public pleas, no helicopters slicing the sky. Silence is the weapon now. Detectives sit in unmarked cars, log movements, map routines, learn the shape of a life built on borrowed time. They watch who the suspect talks to, where they go, what they avoid. Patterns emerge. Patterns always emerge. The tiny clue, the one that restarted everything, is now at the center of the board. It doesn't look dramatic. It wouldn't mean anything to an outsider. But in context, it's a thread, and when pulled, it tugs at everything else. It links to a place, a time, a possibility no one seriously considered in 2001. Back then it was noise. Now it's signal. Detectives revisit locations tied to that thread. Some changed beyond recognition, others frozen in time. A parking lot repaved twice. A building repurposed. A stretch of road widened, smoothed over, but still carrying the same traffic flow it did 2 decades earlier. They stand there and imagine as it was, overlaying past and present, asking the same question again and again. If someone wanted to intercept the victim, where would they do it, and how would they leave without being seen? The answer isn't obvious. It never is. But it's plausible, and plausibility is dangerous when combined with evidence. More records are pulled. Employment logs, utility data, anything that can anchor a person to a place without relying on memory. One item stands out, then another. Small confirmations, stacking slowly, like bricks laid one at a time. An old witness is recontacted, someone who was dismissed years ago because their story didn't fit the dominant theory at the time. Now, with the theory shifting, their words land differently. They remember a vehicle. Not the one everyone was looking for, but another, parked where it shouldn't have been. They remember thinking it was odd, then forgetting about it because life moved on. Investigators don't forget. They write it down. The suspect is brought in, casually, under the guise of routine follow-up. The room is smaller than they remember. The lights harsher. The questions softer, deceptively so. At first, the answers come easily, rehearsed over years, a story polished by repetition. But then the questions turn, gently, toward details the suspect didn't expect to revisit. Times, routes, choices. There's a pause, just a beat too long. When confronted with information they shouldn't have had, the suspect's composure fractures. Not dramatically, subtly. A shift in posture, a defensive laugh, a correction that wasn't necessary. The interview ends without fireworks, but everyone in the room feels it. Something moved. Something cracked. Outside, the case tightens. Prosecutors are consulted early, cautiously. They want more. They always want more. Circumstantial evidence is a maze. It can lead anywhere if you aren't careful. So investigators keep digging, keep testing, keep pushing the science as far as it will go. Evidence once thought exhausted is examined again, this time with sharper tools. A result comes back that changes the temperature in the room. It's not definitive on its own. It never is. But it aligns. It doesn't contradict. It supports. In cold cases, support is momentum. Momentum becomes confidence. Confidence becomes action. The suspect begins to unravel outside the interview room. Friends notice mood swings, a sudden interest in moving, in starting over somewhere new, a late-night purge of personal belongings. Digital traces show frantic activity, searches that reveal too much curiosity about statutes of limitations, about extradition, about what happens if someone talks. Those searches are logged. Screenshots saved. Another brick. Investigators circle back to the family, again with care, again with restraint. This time the update is heavier, more concrete. A name is mentioned, a possibility spoken out loud that has lived only in whispers until now. The family listens, stunned, afraid to hope, afraid not to. They've learned that progress can vanish overnight. Still, something feels different. The silence from law enforcement no longer feels empty. It feels focused. Behind closed doors, a timeline is finalized, tight and unforgiving. Every movement accounted for, every gap narrowed. The tiny clue that started it all now sits at the center, no longer tiny, but towering, supported by everything built around it. It points in one direction and refuses to point anywhere else. The decision is made, not rushed, not dramatic, just inevitable. Warrants are prepared, teams briefed, roles assigned. There is no celebration, no sense of victory yet, only concentration, only the understanding that after more than 20 years, the next few hours will decide whether the truth finally surfaces or slips away forever. As night falls, the suspect goes about their routine, unaware that it has become their last ordinary evening for a very long time. Somewhere nearby, unmarked vehicles wait, engines idling, radios quiet. The community sleeps, oblivious to the fact that a story it thought was finished is about to re-enter its life with force, dragging the past into the present and demanding, at last, to be answered. The arrest doesn't come with sirens or shouting, no cinematic chase through wet streets, no crowd gathering to watch history snap shut. It comes quietly, efficiently, the way this case has learned to move. A knock at the door just after dawn, a pause, the sound of footsteps approaching. When the door opens, the suspect's face flickers through confusion, recognition, and something darker. Something that has been waiting a long time to be seen. Hands are cuffed, rights are read, the words sound rehearsed, almost gentle, but they land with crushing weight. The suspect doesn't resist. Resistance would imply surprise, and surprise left this story a long time ago. As they're led to the car, a neighbor peers through blinds, sensing that something is wrong without knowing exactly what. The same way this community sensed it all those years back, when the driveway set open and the groceries melted into nothing. Inside the interrogation room, the air is different now. This is no longer a conversation. It's a reckoning. The suspect sits at the table, older than they were in 2001, lines etched into their face by time and by secrets, and across from them are detectives who carry 2 decades of unanswered questions like a second skin. The tiny clue is no longer tiny. It's laid out carefully, piece by piece, supported by timelines, records, forensic results, witness statements that now align with terrifying precision. At first, the suspect denies everything. They always do. The words come fast, defensive, familiar, but the detectives don't interrupt. They let the story spill, let it contradict itself, let it circle back on details already disproven. Silence becomes the pressure point. Every pause is deliberate. Every look exchanged across the table says the same thing we know. When the suspect realizes this isn't a bluff, the room shifts. The confidence drains. Shoulders sag. The story changes, subtly at first, then more dramatically. Admissions begin to slip out. Not full confessions, but acknowledgments of presence, of proximity, of moments that were never supposed to be connected. I was there, but I saw them, but each sentence is a step closer to the edge. Outside that room, the news begins to spread. A press release is drafted with careful language, restrained and precise, but the impact is immediate. Florida 2001 cold case. Arrest made. Dramatic development. Phones light up. Newsrooms scramble. The community stirs, disbelief mixing with a cautious kind of relief. People who thought they'd moved on feel the past snap back into focus, sharper than ever. For the family, the call comes softly. There is no celebration on the other end of the line, just silence, broken by breath catching, by tears that don't know whether to fall forward or backward. An arrest is not an ending. It's an opening. It means questions will finally be asked in a room where lies can be challenged, where evidence can speak without interruption. It means the waiting has changed shape, but it hasn't disappeared. Back in the interrogation room, the suspect is offered a chance to explain, to fill in the gaps that have haunted this case for years. What happened after the door opened, why the car was left that way, how the body ended up where it did. Some answers come haltingly. Others are withheld, buried behind legal counsel and carefully chosen silence. The truth, it turns out, doesn't rush out all at once. It has to be extracted, piece by piece, just like the investigation that found it. As the hours pass, the weight of what's unfolding settles in. Detectives who work the case in its infancy sit quietly, listening, remembering younger versions of themselves who never imagined this day would come. Newer investigators feel the gravity of history pressing down, aware that they're standing inside a moment that will be studied, dissected, remembered. Cold cases don't often end like this. Most fade. This one fought back. Evidence is logged again, now with purpose. Statements are transcribed. Charges are prepared. Prosecutors step in, already anticipating the defenses, the challenges, the questions jurors will ask about time, memory, and doubt. The tiny clue that broke the case open is handled with almost reverent care. It's proof that no detail is ever truly dead, only dormant. Outside, cameras gather. Headlines roll across screens. Solved. Arrest shocks community. After 20 years, justice? The question mark hangs there, heavy and honest. Because justice is complicated. It doesn't return what was taken. It doesn't erase the years lived in uncertainty. It only offers a shape to the pain, a narrative where before there was only chaos. As night falls again, the suspect is led to a cell, the door closing with a sound that echoes longer than it should. Somewhere else, a family sits together, speaking the victim's name out loud, not as a ghost, but as a person whose story is finally being told to the end. And across the community, in houses that look just like they did in 2001, people lie awake, staring at ceilings, realizing that the danger they feared all those years ago had a face after all. One that blended in, one that waited, one that was finally, unmistakably, revealed. The morning after the arrest doesn't feel like closure. It feels like aftermath, the kind that settles into corners and refuses to be swept away. Court documents circulate quietly before the headlines catch up, and inside them, the story tightens, line by line, transforming years of rumor into something heavier, something official. Dates, times, actions, words taken down verbatim. The past, once foggy, is now being forced into focus, and not everyone likes what they see. The suspect's name becomes public, and with it comes a ripple of recognition that spreads through the community like a low-frequency shock. People connect dots they didn't know were dots. A familiar face at the grocery store. A casual wave years ago. A memory that suddenly rearranges itself with disturbing clarity. This is how it always happens. The monster never looks like one until the mask is gone. In the days that follow, investigators return to places they thought they'd left behind forever. Not to search, but to confirm. To stand in the spaces where assumptions once lived and replace them with facts. The driveway is still there. The angle of the door unchanged. The road nearby carries the same traffic, indifferent and constant. Only now, the silence feels different. It feels explained. Behind the scenes, prosecutors build the case carefully, aware that time is both their enemy and their witness. They know the defense will point to faded memories, to lost evidence, to the long gap between crime and arrest. So they lean on what time couldn't erase. The tiny clue, the corroboration, the way independent pieces, separated by years, now converge with brutal precision. This isn't a single revelation. It's a pattern that refuses to be ignored. The suspect's initial confidence continues to erode. In custody, the routines are stripped away, replaced with fluorescent lights and long hours alone. Requests for lawyers come and go. Statements are reconsidered. Silence becomes a strategy, then a burden. Because silence leaves room for evidence to speak, and the evidence has learned how to be loud. Witnesses who once hesitated now come forward, emboldened by the arrest, by the realization that the truth might finally stick. One remembers a conversation that felt wrong even then. Another recalls seeing the suspect's car somewhere it shouldn't have been, at a time that never made sense. These aren't dramatic revelations. They don't need to be. They slot into the framework already built, strengthening it, narrowing the exits. The family watches all of this from a careful distance, pulled between relief and exhaustion. For years, they lived in a state of suspended grief, unable to mourn fully because the story had no ending. Now the ending is taking shape, but it's sharp, jagged, filled with details they never wanted to know. They attend meetings. They listen. They ask questions they've rehearsed 1,000 times, and finally receive answers that hurt more than the not knowing ever did. Media coverage intensifies, and with it comes a familiar cycle of speculation and certainty. Commentators dissect the case. Armchair analysts argue timelines and motives. Old photos are rebroadcast. Frozen smiles framed by ominous music. The phrase cold case is repeated so often it starts to lose meaning. But for those who lived it, there is nothing cold about this. It burns. Inside the evidence room, the tiny clue sits labeled and secure, transformed from an afterthought into a cornerstone. Investigators talk about it in low voices, almost reverently, because it represents more than just a break. It represents patience. The idea that truth doesn't expire, that it can survive neglect, misinterpretation, and time itself, waiting for the right moment to assert itself. As the case moves toward its next phase, the community grapples with a complicated reality. Safety, once assumed, now feels conditional. Trust, once given freely, is re-examined. People ask themselves how well they really know those around them. How many secrets can exist in plain sight without anyone noticing? The answers are uncomfortable, and they linger. The suspect is transported, processed, reduced to a series of identifiers and numbers, but the weight of what they're accused of follows them everywhere. In quiet moments, in the absence of questions, the reality presses in. 20 years of freedom balanced against a single act that refused to stay buried. Consequences delayed, but not denied. And as the sun sets on another day, the story continues to unfold, no longer as a mystery without a name, but as a case inching toward judgment. The cold case that once haunted this place has changed its form, trading uncertainty for confrontation, silence for testimony, waiting for the moment when everything that was hidden will be spoken out loud, in a room where truth has nowhere left to hide. Courtroom air has its own weight, heavier than silence, sharper than memory, and when the case finally enters that space, it feels less like a beginning and more like a collision between everything that was hidden and everything that must now be said out loud. The defendant is brought in, no longer a rumor or a name in a file, but a physical presence, seated just feet away from the consequences they spent decades outrunning. The room fills slowly, family on one side, reporters on the other, every bench carrying someone who wants to see how a ghost becomes a person again. The charges are read, each word precise, unforgiving. Dates anchor the crime to a moment in time that refuses to stay in the past. The defendant listens without expression, eyes forward, jaw tight. A posture carefully rehearsed, but tension leaks through anyway. It always does. The judge's voice cuts cleanly through the room, procedural, neutral, unaware of how much emotion hangs on every syllable. Prosecutors begin laying the foundation, not with the tiny clue yet, but with context. They walk the court through 2001, through a Florida summer thick with heat and routine, through a neighborhood that thought it was safe. They describe the open car door, the groceries, the vanishing, letting jurors feel the wrongness before they explain it. This is deliberate. Truth lands harder when it's felt first. The defense counters immediately, planting seeds of doubt like they've done this 100 times before. Too much time has passed. Memories fade. Evidence degrades. People change their stories. They remind the court that cold cases are resurrected on hope as much as fact. That desperation can masquerade as certainty. It's a performance, polished and confident, and it works just enough to make the room uneasy. Then the evidence begins to speak. Slowly, methodically, a timeline appears, clean and brutal, each movement accounted for, each gap closed with records instead of recollection, phone data, logs, documents that don't forget. Witnesses take the stand, voices trembling at first, then steadying as they realize the truth no longer floats alone. They aren't being asked to solve the case, only to say what they saw, what they heard, where they were. Together, it forms a shape that can't be ignored. When the tiny clue is introduced, it doesn't come with drama. No gas from the gallery. No sudden shift in lighting. It's presented as what it always was. Small, unremarkable, easy to miss. And that's exactly what makes it devastating. Experts explain how it was preserved, why it mattered, how new technology gave it a voice it never had before. The defense objects. The judge overrules. The jurors lean in. The clue doesn't accuse on its own. It doesn't need to. It connects. It corroborates. It aligns with everything else until coincidence becomes impossible to argue. The prosecution lets that realization bloom in silence. They don't rush it. They've waited 20 years. A few more seconds won't hurt. The defendant shifts in their seat. It's subtle, but it's there. The mask slips just enough to reveal strain underneath. Their attorney whispers something urgently. The courtroom watches a person realize, in real time, that the story they told themselves for decades is finally collapsing. Outside the courtroom, the community follows every development, headlines updating hourly, social media buzzing with speculation and disbelief. People argue about guilt and innocence like it's a puzzle meant to be solved from a distance, forgetting that this is real, that someone died, that a family has been waiting their entire adult lives for this moment. Inside, the family listens, hands clasped, breathing shallow. Some details are worse than they imagined. Others confirm fears they never said out loud. There is pain in knowing, but there is also power. The truth, once spoken, can no longer be taken away. As the day ends, the court adjourns and everyone files out slowly, heavy with what they've heard. No verdict yet. No resolution. Just the unmistakable sense that something irreversible is happening. The cold case that once felt untouchable is now exposed under fluorescent lights, its secrets unraveling one testimony at a time, moving steadily toward a moment when the past will no longer be allowed to hide behind time, and the silence that protected it will finally be broken. The second phase of the trial strips away any remaining illusion that this is just about evidence. Now it's about people, about memory under oath, about what time does to truth and what it doesn't. The courtroom settles into a tense routine, days marked not by hours, but by testimony. Each witness stepping forward like a bridge between then and now, carrying fragments of a story that refused to stay buried. A former detective takes the stand, voice roughened by age, eyes sharper than anyone expects. He talks about the early days of the investigation, the pressure, the blind spots, the assumptions that shaped every decision. He doesn't excuse them. He names them. Jurors listen closely as he admits what they missed, what they couldn't see yet, how the case slipped through their fingers not because no one cared, but because the tools weren't ready. There is something disarming about honesty this late in the game. Then come the civilians, ordinary people pulled back into an extraordinary moment they thought they'd left behind. A neighbor describes the quiet of that night again, how nothing felt wrong until everything did. A co-worker recounts a conversation that once seemed meaningless, now heavy with implication. Their voices shake, not from fear of the defendant, but from the weight of realizing they were closer to the truth than they ever knew. The defense presses hard, circling every inconsistency, every lapse in memory, every I think and I'm not sure. They want doubt to bloom. Sometimes it does. The courtroom feels it when a witness stumbles, when a date blurs, when a detail slips away. But doubt doesn't land the way it used to. Not anymore, because this time, doubt has something to compete with. The prosecution responds by tightening the frame. They remind the jury that memory fades, but records don't. That fear distorts, but data holds. They bring the story back to the structure built piece by piece over years, to the way independent elements converge without ever needing to touch. It's not about one witness being perfect. It's about many imperfect ones pointing in the same direction. When the defendant's past is introduced, it's done carefully, surgically. No character assassination, no theatrics, just facts, movements, opportunities, proximity, the life they lived alongside the victims, intersecting briefly, fatally. The defense objects. The judge allows it. The jury absorbs it in silence. There's a moment, late in the proceedings, when the defendant looks back toward the gallery. Just once, their eyes pass over the faces seated there, then stop. For a fraction of a second, something flickers. Recognition, regret, or maybe calculation. It's impossible to say. But the family sees it, and it stays with them longer than any testimony. Outside, the narrative hardens. Opinion pieces appear. Experts weigh in. Some argue the case proves no crime is ever truly unsolvable. Others warn about the dangers of delayed justice. The debate grows louder, but inside the courtroom, the noise doesn't matter. Only what's said under oath counts here. Then the prosecution rests. The weight of that moment is unmistakable. Years of work, compressed into weeks of testimony, now handed over to the defense. The room exhales without realizing it's been holding its breath. The defense takes a different approach. They call experts to talk about contamination, about evolving forensic standards, about how certainty can be manufactured from coincidence if you're not careful. It's technical, dense, effective in bursts. Jurors take notes, brows furrowed, trying to balance science against story, possibility against probability. But something is missing. The defense can explain away individual pieces, but not the whole. They can suggest alternatives, but they can't build one that stands on its own. Their narrative feels like a response, not a truth. And jurors feel the difference, even if they can't articulate it yet. When closing arguments approach, tension coils tight. This is where everything condenses, where 20 years of silence is weighed against a few hours of persuasion. The prosecution speaks last, returning again to the tiny clue, to the detail that waited quietly while the world moved on. They don't raise their voices. They don't need to. They let the timeline speak. They let the alignment speak. They let the absence of any other plausible explanation echo in the room. They end with a simple statement. Time didn't solve this case. People did. People who refused to let the truth disappear just because it was inconvenient. People who listened when something small finally spoke. The jury files out without a word. The door closes. The wait begins again. But this time it's different. This time, the waiting has edges. It has a shape. Outside the courtroom, the family sits together, exhausted, suspended between fear and relief. Across the room, the defendant stares at nothing, finally forced to confront a reality that no longer bends to will or denial. And somewhere in that quiet, the cold case holds its breath, closer than it has ever been to a final answer, knowing that whatever comes next will not just decide guilt or innocence, but will define how this story is remembered, and whether the silence that protected it for so long is finally, completely undone. The jury room is sealed off from the world, but the weight of it presses outward anyway. Felt in the courtroom, in the hallway, in the quiet spaces where no one knows what to do with their hands. 12 people sit around a table scattered with notes, exhibits, timelines that refuse to be ignored. The door closes, and with it goes the last chance for anyone else to influence what happens next. Now it's just them and the story they've been given. At first, the discussion is careful, almost polite. They talk about instructions, about standards, about what reasonable doubt actually means when years stretch between act and consequence. Some focus on the science, others on the human moments that lingered too long to be coincidence. No one speaks in absolutes yet. They don't need to. The case is already doing that for them. They return again and again to the same places. The timeline, the proximity, the tiny clue. Someone calls it insignificant, and another juror shakes their head, pointing out how insignificance is exactly why it worked, why it survived untouched for so long. A third juror mentions how it lines up with the phone records, the witness testimony, the documented movements that don't rely on memory at all. The room grows quieter as the pieces settle into place. Disagreement surfaces as it must. One juror wonders aloud if the story feels too neat, too clean after so much time. Another counters that the mess was the early investigation, not the truth itself. They debate intent, opportunity, motive, not as abstract concepts but as human choices. Could someone live with this for 20 years? The answer comes softly. People live with worse. Hours pass. Coffee goes cold. Voices drop. At some point, no one is arguing anymore. They are clarifying. That shift is subtle but decisive. The question stops being, "Did this happen?" and becomes, "How do we say it happened?" When the vote is finally taken, it's not dramatic. No raised voices. Just quiet hands, one after another, moving in the same direction. Back in the courtroom, time stretches thin. The family sits rigid, afraid to move, afraid to hope. The defendant waits with a stillness that feels practiced, eyes fixed ahead, jaw clenched so tightly it seems painful. Reporters glance at the door every few seconds, fingers hovering over keyboards, ready to transmit history the moment it arrives. The bailiff appears. The room stands. The jury files in, faces unreadable. The foreperson holding a single piece of paper that now contains more weight than any document in the building. The judge asks the question everyone has been waiting for, voice steady, controlled, as if this is just another case, just another day. The verdict is read. The words land without echo, but their impact is immediate. Guilty. The air changes. A sound escapes the family that is half sob, half breath. Years of suspended grief collapsing inward all at once. Some cry openly. Others sit in stunned silence, hands covering mouths, eyes fixed on nothing. This is not celebration. It is release. The defendant doesn't move at first. For a brief moment, it looks like the words didn't register. Then the shoulders slump. The head dips. The performance ends. Whatever story they told themselves for 2 decades no longer has an audience. The judge thanks the jury, dismisses them, and just like that, The truth becomes official. Outside, the headline writes itself. Florida 2001 cold case solved. Tiny clue leads to dramatic arrest. Verdict reached after decades of silence. Cameras flash. Microphones crowd forward. Statements are read carefully, deliberately. Each word chosen to honor the gravity of what's been decided. Law enforcement speaks of persistence. Prosecutors speak of justice delayed, not denied. The family steps out last. Faces drawn but resolute. They don't answer many questions. They don't need to. Their presence says enough. For the first time since 2001, they're no longer waiting. The story that haunted them no longer belongs to speculation or rumor. It has been named, confronted, and judged. As the courthouse empties and the day moves on, the case leaves behind a different kind of silence, not the suffocating kind that followed the disappearance. This one is heavy, yes, but it's grounded. It has edges. It has truth. And somewhere deep in the evidence room, the tiny clue rests again, no longer dormant, no longer overlooked, having done what it waited patiently to do, closing a chapter that refused to stay open, proving that even the smallest detail can carry enough weight to bend time, and finally, bring a cold case to its end. Sentencing does not arrive with the shock of the verdict. It comes slower, heavier, like whether you can feel changing days in advance. The courtroom fills again, but the energy is different now. The question is no longer what happened. That has been answered. The question is what happens next, and whether any number of years can balance the scale after so much time has already passed. The defendant is brought in wearing the same expression they've worn since the verdict. A carefully controlled emptiness that reads as resignation to some and calculation to others. Chains clink softly as they move, a sound that cuts through the room sharper than any gavel. Across the aisle, the family watches, not with anger, but with a kind of exhausted focus, as if they're determined not to miss a single second of this final transformation from mystery to consequence. Prosecutors speak first. They don't repeat the case. They don't need to. Instead, they talk about impact, about the life interrupted, the years stolen, the birthdays missed, the holidays spent waiting for a call that never came. They describe a community altered by a single act of violence, how trust fractured quietly and never fully returned. Their words are measured, restrained, but the effect is cumulative, each sentence pressing down until the room feels smaller. Then the defense stands. They talk about time served in a different way, about the defendant's life since 2001, about family, employment, the absence of prior convictions. They argue that decades have passed, that punishment now cannot undo what happened then. It's a familiar argument. It lands with a dull thud. The jury has already decided where responsibility lies. This is not about erasing the past. It's about acknowledging it. Victim impact statements follow, and the air shifts again. One by one, family members stand, voices trembling but steady enough to carry the weight they've held inside for years. They speak directly to the person who altered their lives without permission. Some express anger, others grief. One speaks of the strange relief of finally knowing, even when knowing hurts. There is no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, just truth, spoken plainly, filling the space where silence once lived. The defendant declines to speak. Their attorney notes it for the record. The absence of words feels loud, but no one is surprised. This story has always been defined by what wasn't said, by gaps left intentionally open. The judge nods and begins to speak, voice calm, deliberate, carrying the authority of a system designed to move forward even when time resists. The sentence is read. It is long. It is definitive. It acknowledges the years that passed without justice and the gravity of the crime itself. As the words settle, there is no reaction from the defendant beyond a slight tightening of the jaw. The family reacts differently. Some close their eyes. Some reach for each other. Tears fall, not in waves, but quietly, like something finally releasing its grip. Outside the courthouse, the final chapter is written in sound bites and headlines. Cold case ends with sentencing. Justice after 20 years. Tiny clue breaks decades-long silence. The story travels far beyond Florida now, cited in podcasts, documentaries, training seminars. It becomes an example, proof that persistence matters, that evidence remembers, even when people don't. But for those closest to it, the case doesn't become a lesson. It becomes a line drawn between before and after. They return home to houses that feel the same and completely different. The absence doesn't vanish. It never will. But it changes shape, no longer a question mark, no longer a wound that reopens every time someone asks what happened. Law enforcement closes the file with a final notation. Careful handwriting marking the end of a long pursuit. Some sit quietly afterward, thinking about other cases, other boxes on shelves, wondering what else might be waiting. The tiny clue is mentioned again, not as an anomaly, but as a reminder. Look again. Look closer. As the months pass, the story begins to fade from daily conversation, but it never fully disappears. It lingers in the way people talk about justice, about patience, about the danger of assuming the past is finished just because it's quiet. The Florida 2001 cold case is no longer unsolved, but its echo remains, a low, steady reminder that time can delay truth, but it cannot erase it. And somewhere between closure and memory, between loss and accountability, the case settles into history, not as a cautionary tale alone, but as proof that even after decades of darkness, something small, overlooked, and patient can still rise, cut through the silence, and change everything. After sentencing, the world expects an ending, a clean fade-out where justice neatly replaces grief. But that isn't how it works. The case may be closed on paper, but its gravity lingers, pulling at everything around it. In the weeks that follow, life resumes in familiar patterns, yet nothing feels entirely normal. The community moves forward carefully, like someone testing weight on a healed but still tender bone. The family begins the slow work of redefining their lives without the question that once consumed them. They no longer wake up wondering what happened. Instead, they wake up knowing, and that knowledge carries its own weight. Some find comfort in routine, others in speaking publicly, turning private pain into something that might prevent another silence from stretching this long. None of them describe it as healing. They describe it as learning how to breathe again. Law enforcement agencies revisit the case internally, not to relive it, but to learn from it. Training sessions reference it without naming it at first, describing a cold case revived by persistence and technology, by someone willing to ask an old question one more time. Eventually, the details come out. The tiny clue, the overlooked evidence, the moment when the case shifted from impossible to inevitable. It becomes part of institutional memory, a reminder carved into procedure. The detectives closest to it experience a different kind of aftermath. Some feel relief. Others feel a hollow quiet where adrenaline once lived. They think about the years spent circling the same unanswered questions, the nights replaying interviews, the frustration of knowing the truth was close but unreachable. Solving the case doesn't erase that history. It reframes it. It gives it a reason. The defendant disappears into the system, transferred, processed, absorbed by routines designed to strip individuality away. Appeals are discussed, motions filed, possibilities weighed. The legal story may not be entirely finished, but its shape is fixed now. Guilt has been named. Responsibility assigned. Whatever comes next unfolds within those boundaries. Beyond Florida, the case gains a second life in the public imagination. Podcasts dedicate entire seasons to it. Documentaries dissect each phase, each misstep, each breakthrough. The tiny clue becomes almost mythic in retelling, a symbol of hope for other families still waiting. But those closest to the truth know it wasn't magic. It was patience. It was refusal. It was the willingness to believe that quiet evidence still mattered. In the neighborhood where it all began, the driveway looks the same as it always did. Cars come and go. Groceries are unloaded. Life continues in small, ordinary motions. But for those who remember, this space carries an invisible mark, a reminder that normalcy can fracture without warning, that safety is never guaranteed, only assumed. Children who were too young to understand in 2001 hear the story now as adults, absorbing it not as fear, but as context. This is what happened here. This is why people still talk about it. The case becomes part of local history, passed down not to terrify, but to remind. Quietly, other cold cases are reopened, boxes pulled from shelves, evidence re-examined. The ripple effect spreads outward, subtle but real. One solved case doesn't fix a system, but it changes the way people look at the past. It challenges the idea that time alone can bury truth. And so the story stretches forward, no longer driven by mystery, but by meaning. What does it say about justice, about memory, about the cost of waiting? There are no simple answers, only lessons learned the hard way. The Florida 2001 cold case now exists in a different form, no longer a question mark, no longer an open wound, but a scar, visible, permanent, and proof of survival. It reminds everyone who encounters it that even when years pass in silence, even when hope thins to almost nothing, the smallest detail can still carry enough force to reshape the present, and that some truths, no matter how long they wait, will not stay hidden forever. In the end, what remains is not the courtroom, not the headlines, not even the sentence written into the record. What remains is the echo, the low, persistent hum of a story that lived too long in the dark and changed everyone it touched. Years after the verdict, people still pause when they hear the case mentioned, still lower their voices, still feel the instinctive pull toward the past, as if listening closely might reveal something more. The victim's name is no longer followed by the word missing, no longer framed by uncertainty. It stands alone now, anchored to truth, carried forward in conversations that sound different than they used to. Not what happened, but this is what happened. That shift matters. It doesn't bring anyone back, but it gives memory a shape that can be held without breaking apart. For the family, time continues, uneven and imperfect. There are moments of peace that arrive unexpectedly, moments when laughter doesn't feel like betrayal, when the weight on their chest lifts just enough to breathe freely. There are also moments when grief returns without warning, sharp and familiar. Justice didn't erase the pain. It reorganized it. It gave it boundaries. The investigators move on to other cases, other files, other unanswered questions, but this one never fully leaves them. It surfaces in quiet moments, in late-night reviews, in the pause before dismissing a detail as insignificant. The tiny clue becomes less a symbol and more a habit of mind. Look again. Look closer. Don't assume silence means nothing is there. The community carries the story forward in small ways. In how they talk about safety, in how they watch out for one another, in how they teach their children that ordinary places can hold extraordinary secrets, and that vigilance is not paranoia, but care. The shock that once rippled through the neighborhood settles into something steadier, a collective memory that refuses to fade completely. Beyond it all, the case takes on a quieter legacy. It's cited less often now, replaced by newer stories, newer mysteries. But when it's mentioned, it still lands, because it reminds people of something uncomfortable and undeniable. That time does not protect the guilty, that the past is not passive, that truth has a way of surviving neglect, waiting patiently for the moment it can no longer be ignored. The cold case that once haunted Florida no longer asks for answers. It offers them. Not clean, not comforting, but real. It stands as proof that even the smallest fragment, the most easily dismissed detail, can outlast decades of doubt and finally tilt the balance toward accountability. And so the story ends where it began, not with noise, but with quiet. A quiet that is no longer empty. A quiet filled with understanding, with consequence, with the knowledge that what was lost has been acknowledged, and what was hidden has been brought into the light. This is the final shape of the Florida 2001 cold case. Not just solved, but settled into history, carrying with it a warning and a promise. That silence is never the end of the story, and that somewhere in a box, in a file, in a detail waiting to be seen, the truth is always closer than it seems. Years later, when the cameras are gone and the transcripts are archived, the case continues to exist in quieter ways, slipping into conversations that start with someone saying, "I remember that," and end with a pause that means more than words. It lives in the pauses, in the way people stop mid-sentence, realizing how close certainty once came to never arriving at all. In training rooms and precinct hallways, the story is told without drama, stripped of headlines, reduced to decisions and consequences. An instructor points to a slide, to a line item that once seemed too small to matter, and says this is where it turned. Recruits lean forward. Veterans nod. Everyone understands the same thing at once. Most cases don't fail because of what's missing, but because of what's ignored. The evidence itself ages quietly. Bags are resealed. Labels updated. The tiny clue, now famous in its own restrained way, is handled less often, but never casually. It has earned a different kind of respect, not as a miracle, not as luck, but as proof that attention is a form of justice, that listening closely can change outcomes long after the moment has passed. The family marks time differently now. Anniversaries are no longer questions. They are moments of reflection, heavy but grounded. They visit places they avoided for years. They speak the victim's name without bracing themselves for follow-up questions. The story no longer spirals when it's told. It holds. Some nights, the community feels almost exactly as it did before everything changed. The same sounds, the same warm air, the same quiet streets. But there's an undercurrent now, a shared understanding that ordinary doesn't mean safe, and that vigilance doesn't have to mean fear. It can mean remembering. Across the country, other families still wait. They hear about this case in fragments, in retellings, in podcasts that promise hope without guaranteeing it. Some take comfort in it. Others feel the ache sharpen. Because every solved case is a reminder of the unsolved ones, of boxes still closed, of clues still silent. The Florida 2001 cold case doesn't offer easy optimism. It offers persistence. In moments of doubt, someone will always ask the same question. What if that clue had never been re-examined? The answer hangs there, unsettling and honest. Then someone else answers it the only way that matters. But it was. And because it was, the truth had a chance. The defendant fades from public memory, reduced to a footnote in a larger narrative about accountability and time. Their name is spoken less often. Their image replaced by lessons learned. This, too, is part of justice. Not erasure, but proportion. The focus returns where it always belonged. And so the story settles into its final rhythm, no longer driven by urgency, no longer demanding attention, but ready when it's needed. A reminder that silence can be misleading, that patience is not the same as forgetting, that even after decades, a single overlooked detail can rise, insist on being heard, and change everything that follows. This is what remains of the Florida 2001 cold case. Not just a solved mystery, but a lasting echo, a proof of life for truth itself, waiting, watching, and, when the moment finally comes, speaking clearly enough to be heard at last. There is a moment, long after everything is decided, when the case finally stops feeling heavy, not because it has been forgotten, but because it has been absorbed. It becomes part of the background hum of experience, something understood rather than carried. People don't flinch when it's mentioned anymore. They listen, they nod, they let it exist without demanding more from it. In archives and databases, the case is now complete, tagged and categorized, its status changed from unsolved to closed, A single word that took more than 2 decades to earn. Clerks enter the final updates, click save, and move on to the next file. But the gravity of that action lingers. Somewhere, a system designed to hold human tragedy makes room for one less unanswered question. The tiny clue once overlooked becomes a reference point in quiet debates about investigation and instinct. Was it luck that someone looked again or inevitability? The answer depends on who you ask. Some call it timing, others call it stubbornness. The truth sits somewhere in between, shaped by human refusal to accept that silence is the same thing as absence. The family finds themselves becoming guardians of memory rather than seekers of answers. They choose which parts of the story to share and which to keep close. They learn that telling it is easier now, but still not easy. Each retelling smooths some edges and sharpens others. Grief doesn't vanish. It evolves. Occasionally, a letter arrives. From someone who followed the case. From someone still waiting on their own. They write about hope, about fear, about the strange comfort of knowing that time doesn't always win. The family reads every word. They understand what's being asked without it ever being said. Law enforcement marks the case quietly on anniversaries, not with ceremonies, but with pauses. A glance at a shelf, a reminder during briefings. It becomes shorthand for a principle rather than a tragedy. Don't rush past the small things. Don't assume you've seen everything. The place where it began continues its ordinary existence, unchanged in ways that matter and changed in ways that can't be seen. People still park their cars the same way. Still unload groceries. Still assume tomorrow will look like today. But somewhere beneath that normalcy is an awareness that didn't exist before, a thin line of caution woven into routine. As years stack on top of years, the case drifts further from the present, but it never fully dissolves into the past. It waits there, available, ready to be remembered when someone needs proof that answers can come late and still matter. That justice doesn't have an expiration date, only obstacles. And when the story is told one last time, not for headlines or lessons or hope, but simply because it deserves to be told, it ends the same way it always has. Quietly, without spectacle, with the understanding that truth doesn't always arrive loudly, and that sometimes the most powerful force in any investigation is the willingness to listen when something small finally decides to speak. Eventually, the story stops asking to be retold and starts choosing its moments. It surfaces not on anniversaries or in retrospectives, but in ordinary conversations where someone hesitates before dismissing a detail, where a pause replaces certainty, where experience gently interrupts assumption. This is how legacies actually work, quietly, selectively, without announcement. In offices where new cases arrive every day, the Florida file is no longer pulled often, but it's never far. A senior investigator will mention it mid-sentence, not to impress, not to warn, but to recalibrate, to remind everyone in the room that certainty is a luxury and patience is a tool. Heads nod, pens stop, the room listens. The family's life keeps unfolding in ways that once felt impossible. Milestones arrive without the old dread attached to them. There is room now for forward motion that doesn't feel like betrayal. They still carry the past, but it no longer dictates the future. When they speak of the case, it's with steadiness, not urgency, with clarity instead of pleading. That change is its own kind of justice. In the wider world, the case drifts in and out of focus as attention moves on. New mysteries demand airtime. New tragedies ask for answers. But every so often, someone stumbles across the story late at night, drawn in by a headline and stays until the end. They sit there afterward, unsettled, thinking not about the crime, but about time, about how close the truth came to never being seen at all. The tiny clue continues its quiet work, long after the verdict. It influences decisions that will never be traced back to it, prevents mistakes no one will know were avoided, changes outcomes without ever being credited. This is the strange afterlife of evidence. Once it speaks, It never really goes silent again. The defendant's presence fades further into abstraction, a reminder rather than a figure. The system absorbs them, processes them, moves on. Accountability remains, steady and unremarkable, exactly as it should be. The focus returns to what was taken, not who took it. And so the case settles into its final place, not as a headline, not as a lesson carved in stone, but as a quiet companion to anyone willing to look twice. A story that doesn't insist on attention, but rewards it. This is where the Florida 2001 cold case truly ends. Not with closure, not with certainty, but with continuity. With the understanding that truth doesn't just resolve the past, it reshapes the present, one small, overlooked detail at a time. Long after the last appeal is filed, after the final document is stamped and shelved, the case finds its most permanent home in the quiet instincts of people who never knew the victim's name at the time it mattered most. It lives in the hesitation before a conclusion, in the extra minutes spent reviewing a line of data, in the decision not to discard something just because it doesn't announce its importance. In places where investigations begin, rookies learn the mechanics, veterans teach the caution, and somewhere between them the Florida case is referenced without ceremony, not as a triumph, not as a warning, but as a presence. A reminder that the distance between noise and truth is often measured in attention, not effort. The family reaches a point where the case is no longer the first thing people ask about. Conversations drift to other subjects. Laughter comes easier. When the story does come up, it no longer hijacks the room. It sits there, acknowledged, respected, no longer demanding to be carried alone. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. The place itself continues to age. Paint peels. Trees grow again. New families move in, unaware of what once fractured the quiet here. And yet, the land remembers in its own way, not as fear but as context, as proof that even the most unremarkable locations can hold histories that wait patiently to be uncovered. Somewhere, another investigator opens an old box for the first time. Dust rising, labels fading. They don't know it yet, but they are standing at the beginning of a story that might one day mirror this one. The Florida case doesn't promise success. It promises possibility. It suggests that waiting is not the same as losing, and that attention can travel farther than time. As years continue to layer over the past, the case grows quieter still, settling into something like permanence. Not forgotten, not celebrated, simply known. It becomes part of the long, imperfect record of how truth behaves when challenged. Slow, resistant, but ultimately persistent. And in that persistence lies its final meaning, that justice doesn't arrive because it is loud or urgent or demanded. It arrives because someone, somewhere, refused to stop listening. Because a detail that once seemed too small to matter was allowed to exist long enough to become undeniable. This is the last echo of the Florida 2001 cold case. A steady one, a lasting one, a reminder carried forward not in headlines, but in habits. Proof that even after decades of silence, the truth does not disappear. It waits. In the final distance from the case, when even the echoes begin to thin, what's left is not a story, but a posture toward the world, a way of looking at things. People who know the case, well, don't talk about it as an ending. They talk about it as a shift, a moment when certainty learned to be patient, when doubt learned to wait instead of disappear. The systems that once failed it are quieter now, more cautious. Procedures change not because of blame, but because of memory. Someone adds a line to a checklist. Someone else hesitates before closing a file. These moments never make the news. They don't need to. They're the real inheritance of a solved cold case, the invisible corrections that ripple forward into cases no one will ever connect back to Florida. 2001. The family reaches a place where the case no longer defines their introduction. They are known for who they are, not just what they endured. The loss remains, permanent and unmoving, but it no longer eclipses everything else. Grief becomes something they carry with strength instead of something that carries them. That, too, is a kind of resolution. In rare moments, someone asks the question that always comes last. Was it worth it, after all that time? The answer is never immediate. It doesn't come from logic or law or outcome. It comes from the understanding that truth, once found, rearranges everything that follows it. That a life acknowledged is not the same as a life lost twice. The case continues to be cited, but less often now. Its edges soften, the specifics blur for those who didn't live it, but the core remains intact. A disappearance that refused to stay quiet, a detail that refused to stay small, a truth that waited longer than anyone thought reasonable, and arrived anyway. This is where the story finally dissolves, not into nothing, but into practice, into instinct, into the quiet confidence that even when years pass without answers, the past is not finished speaking. The Florida 2001 cold case no longer asks for attention. It doesn't need it. Its work is done. What it leaves behind is simpler and stronger. The knowledge that silence is never proof of absence, that patience can outlast denial, and that somewhere, in the overlooked margins of any story, the truth is still there, waiting to be noticed, at the furthest edge of memory, where even significance begins to thin. The case becomes something almost invisible, woven into the way people think rather than what they remember. It no longer arrives as a story. It arrives as an instinctive pause, a second look, a quiet refusal to accept that unanswered means unanswerable. Those who were closest to it can feel the difference now. The weight they carried for so long has shifted into something steadier, something that no longer pulls them backward. The past doesn't dominate the present anymore. It informs it. It stands behind them instead of in front, no longer blocking the view forward. In the justice system, the case has finished teaching what it can teach. It no longer needs to be cited by name. Its lessons have moved deeper than language, embedded in habits and hesitations, in the muscle memory of people who know that certainty is often earned late. Files close more carefully now. Conclusions are reached more slowly. Silence is treated with suspicion, not comfort. The victim's name continues to be spoken, but without urgency, without the sharp edge of pleading. It is spoken with respect, with clarity, with the understanding that acknowledgement is not temporary. It doesn't expire when a verdict is read. It persists in the simple act of remembering, without fear of forgetting again. Time continues to pass, as it always does, indifferent and unstoppable. New stories replace old ones. New mysteries demand attention. But every once in a while, someone working late, flipping through records, will feel that familiar hesitation and think of a case they barely remember, one that waited decades for a single overlooked detail to finally matter. And they will look again. That is the final reach of this story. Not resolution, not closure, influence. A quiet, lasting pressure on the future. The Florida 2001 cold case no longer exists as an event. It exists as proof. Proof that truth is not fragile, that it does not vanish simply because it is ignored, that it can endure neglect, doubt, and time itself, and still emerge intact when someone is willing to listen closely enough. And somewhere, in that listening, the story truly ends, not with silence, but with attention held long enough to make silence impossible again. By the time the case reaches this distance, it no longer belongs to anyone in particular. It isn't held by the family alone, or by investigators, or by the records that keep its facts intact. It belongs to the space between people, to the shared understanding that some truths take their time, and that waiting does not mean surrender. What lingers now is not the crime itself, but the discipline it demanded, the discipline to sit with uncertainty without letting it harden into indifference, the discipline to return to old ground without assuming it has nothing left to offer. This is what the case leaves behind when everything else has been said. In quiet offices and late shifts, the story reappears in fragments. Not as Florida, not as 2001, just as a reminder that there is always one more angle, one more question that hasn't been asked the right way yet. People don't realize they're carrying it forward. They just know that something small feels worth another look. The family reaches a place where the case feels distant but not detached. It no longer defines the rhythm of their days, but it still informs their sense of meaning. They understand now that resolution is not a moment. It's a condition, a way of standing in the world without being pulled apart by what-ifs. The victim's absence remains, unchanged and permanent, but it is no longer undefined. It has context. It has acknowledgement. It has truth surrounding it like a boundary that cannot be crossed again. That boundary doesn't heal the loss, but it protects it from erasure. Outside the places where the case is remembered at all, life continues without reference to it. People walk past each other unaware of how close certainty once came to never existing here. And that is fine. Stories like this don't need constant witnesses. They only need to have been told once, clearly, completely. What began as a disappearance, then a cold case, then a quiet resurgence, ends as something simpler and more durable. A shared proof that time is not an accomplice, that silence is not an answer, that even after decades, attention can still change the shape of truth. This is the last residue of the Florida 2001 cold case. Not a lesson announced, not a warning posted, but a quiet inheritance, passed on whenever someone slows down, whenever someone refuses to close a file just because it's old, whenever someone listens long enough for something small to finally speak. At this point, the case exists almost entirely as atmosphere, a pressure change you can't see but can feel. It shows up when someone hesitates before saying there's nothing there, when a room goes quiet after a detail is mentioned that doesn't quite fit. The story no longer needs to be told straight through. It has dispersed, settling into the instincts of people who understand what waiting can do. The long arc of it reframes how time is understood, not as an eraser, but as a filter. What mattered endured. What didn't fell away. The tiny clue survived not because it was loud, but because it was true, and truth, when left alone, has a way of keeping its shape. For those who lived through the years of uncertainty, there's a subtle relief in knowing the past no longer competes with the present. They can remember without bracing themselves. They can say the year out loud without counting how much time has passed since. The case no longer intrudes. It accompanies. In professional circles, the story is rarely named now. It doesn't need a title. Someone will say, "Remember that one where the smallest thing cracked it open," and everyone will know what they mean. The specifics aren't the point anymore. The posture is. Attention over assumption. Patience over panic. The world keeps producing mysteries at an unforgiving pace. New cases arrive faster than old ones can be resolved. But every so often, someone pauses at the edge of giving up and thinks of a case that waited 20 years to speak. That thought changes what they do next. They stay. They look again. The victim's story holds steady, no longer threatened by being rewritten or forgotten. It has crossed a threshold where it can't be undone. It exists now with certainty, and certainty has a gravity of its own. It pulls memory into alignment. It keeps the past from drifting. And so the Florida 2001 cold case continues its quiet work, long after its official end. It no longer asks questions. It answers them indirectly, shaping how people respond when silence presents itself as final. This is how such stories truly conclude, not with a full stop, but with a lasting influence. A gentle insistence that old does not mean empty, that overlooked does not mean irrelevant, and that somewhere, waiting patiently, the truth is still capable of making itself known. If someone is willing to keep listening, by the 20th telling, the case has shed almost everything unnecessary. What remains is essence, not the chronology, not the exhibits, not the courtroom scenes replayed too many times, but the feeling that settles in the chest when people realize how close the truth came to vanishing. It's the awareness that answers don't always arrive because they're chased, but because they are allowed to wait. The passage of time no longer feels like an enemy here. It feels like terrain. Something crossed slowly, deliberately, with missteps and detours, but crossed nonetheless. The case teaches that endurance is not passive. It is active restraint, the decision not to close the door too soon, the refusal to mistake quiet for emptiness. Those who encounter the story late, without context or emotional attachment, often describe the same reaction. Not shock, not anger, a kind of stillness, the recognition that the world contains far more unresolved weight than anyone realizes, and that resolution, when it comes, is rarely loud. It arrives already tired, already shaped by years of waiting. In the end, the Florida 2001 cold case doesn't demand belief. It doesn't insist on meaning. It simply exists as proof of concept, that attention can outlast denial, that truth does not need momentum to survive, that something overlooked can remain intact long enough to matter when everything else has changed. The final silence around the case is not absence. It is stability, the kind that comes only after uncertainty has been named and contained. The story no longer pulls at the present. It rests beneath it, supportive rather than disruptive, like a foundation no one notices unless it's missing. And that is where the case finally stops moving, not because there is nothing left to say, but because nothing more needs to be said. The Florida 2001 cold case has completed its work. What it leaves behind is not closure, but continuity. A steady reminder, carried forward quietly, that even after decades, even after silence hardens into habit, the truth is still capable of rising, unchanged, undeniable, and ready, when someone is willing to listen long enough. By the time the story reaches this far, it has stopped behaving like a case at all. It behaves like a shadow, always present, rarely noticed, shaping perception without announcing itself. People don't cite it anymore. They feel it, in the pause before certainty, in the instinct to double-check, in the quiet discomfort when something almost makes sense, but not quite. Time has done what it always does, soften the edges without erasing the form. The sharpest details blur, but the outline holds. What remains is not memory in the traditional sense, but orientation, a reference point for how truth moves when it's obstructed, delayed, underestimated. The family no longer measures life against the case. They measure it against now, against what is present instead of what was missing. The absence is still there, permanent and unchangeable, but it no longer defines the horizon. It exists behind them, not ahead. That shift, invisible to outsiders, is everything. Within institutions, the case has completed its transformation from event to instinct. No one announces its influence. It shows up in margins, in footnotes, in decisions that feel cautious for reasons no one fully articulates. This is how lessons survive, by becoming habits instead of warnings. Occasionally, someone asks why stories like this still matter once they're finished. The answer isn't about deterrence or closure, or even justice. It's about continuity, about proving that meaning can arrive late and still count. That acknowledgement delayed is not acknowledgement denied. The world continues producing silence at scale, new unanswered questions, new gaps where certainty should be. The Florida case does not solve them. It does something quieter. It refuses to let silence masquerade as finality. And so, even now, long after verdicts and sentences and headlines, the story maintains its last function. It stays available, ready to be remembered when doubt is tempting, when fatigue suggests giving up, when something small feels unworthy of attention. This is the final state of the Florida 2001 cold case. Not resolved into nothingness, but resolved into presence. A constant, understated reminder that truth does not rush, does not shout, does not demand. It waits, intact, patient, unchanged, until someone is willing to stop, look again, and listen long enough to hear it.